And today Margaret, Seiler, and myself are going to be talking with Tom Cartwright, with Allan Mestel, to kind of get a picture of the different responses that we see around the world to something that's gone on forever, and that's people in motion, people going from somewhere to somewhere for various reasons, sometimes very urgent reasons. I think those are the cases that we're looking at today. People that are moving for very urgent reasons. Tom has been present at the sites of moving humanity for more sites than I can count, and he's also been tracking for a long time now the many airborne efforts to prevent migration. Tom recently volunteered at the World Kitchen in Poland and can reflect on his time there. Allan Mestel is a portrait photographer. In the last few years, he's turned his photographer's eye onto the struggle of human beings to survive by migration. He's visited Poland and Ukraine recently. He spent a lot of time with us and around us as documenting with Witness at the Border the place where we find ourselves observing what goes on. In fact, he was down here where I'm talking from right now, Brownsville, Texas, where we came down to look at the pending date of the lifting of Title 42, a policy that that pretends to restrict motion because of COVID, but in fact is just a primitive cudgel to force people not to move and not to come into this country. We find ourselves down here in the valley. We were here for a few days, and we encountered the disappointment of Title 42 remaining in place, as well as other heartbreak that I'm sure everybody's aware of here in Texas. I think we're going to start with taking a look at the photos that Allan took during his visit to Poland and to the Ukraine, to look at one response to a group of people that are moving out of desperation. So if we could see those photos now, and Allan will look at them with us and comment on what he sees and what he saw as he took those photos.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, so what we're seeing here are photographs that I took in mid-March, which was sort of at the peak of the migration, the refugee crisis, in terms of people fleeing from Ukraine into Europe. I was in Medyka, which is the main border crossing between Ukraine and Poland. This is a woman I saw with 5 children. I'm not sure if they were all hers. She was having trouble wrangling them all. Most of the people I saw came with one suitcase, whatever they could carry. Very few people had anything more than a suitcase. Yeah, I just want to stop here for a sec, Carla. This was interesting. Many people came through with shopping carts with all of their belongings in there. You can see a young girl unloading a cart. She's got diapers. The aid response in terms of this sort of decentralized aid response, international aid response, was amazing to see. People from all over the world literally just coming, in minivans that they packed with supplies, driving to the border with no real plan other than they wanted to help, and providing supplies like diapers and food and clothing, tons of clothing. A stark contrast to what we see at the U.S.-Mexico border. You can carry on, Carla. Once again, this woman has a baby, and lots of babies. Lots of pets, babies. Okay, stop here. This is you can stop here. This was the lineup of people that, as they came through the border crossing, and got some supplies, got some food. The Polish army was basically keeping everybody moving. They didn't want a camp building up at the border, and they were extremely efficient about providing. When I was there, the buses were running 24/7. And these people were lined up for buses, which would take them to a large refugee center in Brownsville, which is the nearest large city, and to the train stations, bus stations that would take them to other parts of Europe. But this lineup of hundreds of people, really, for the week that I was there, I never saw it abate very much at all, day or night. This was just a constant stream of humanity. Yeah, go on. These were kids on a bus waiting to move. Again, just the stuffed animals there were so many stuffed animals that people were walking around with garbage bags full of stuffed animals, walking up and down the line, just handing them out to children. It's amazing what a stuffed animal, just a simple stuffed animal, can do to a child's face in that circumstance. Okay, go on. Okay, so if you want to hold it here, this is the railway station in Brownsville, which this is on a platform. These people again waiting for trains, probably going to Warsaw, Krakow. You can see this family, three generations. You'll note that in these pictures, you see 95% women and children. All the men have stayed behind in Ukraine, to serve. Okay. Again, the train station. Again. And you can see this guy, this poor guy, if you just want to stop there for 1 second, obviously he was an amputee, had one bag with him, didn't appear to have anyone with him. He was being tended to by volunteers at the train station. Again, the train station was sort of a refugee center. This is the train station there, if you want to hold that. This is the train station in Brownsville. There's desks set up, volunteers trying to get people organized and to their next location. Tremendous number of volunteers, just doing what they could to make sure that people were kept in transit to somewhere where they could find safety and some semblance of normality. That's a Polish firefighter just walking through the station there. Okay, so this is a good one, because this is again indicative of the way that the Poles thought of these refugees. This is the platform 5, which is the secure track platform that the trains from Lviv and Odessa would come into. And these were baby carriers and strollers that had just been left there for the use of the refugees by the Polish people. Honestly, in terms of clothing, strollers, resources like this, there was an abundance of it. There was way more than people needed, and more kept coming. Again, just the Polish people trying to do what they could to help these people have a safer journey. Okay. This is just a family embracing. This is the foot crossing from Ukraine. People came by foot. You can see these people have walked across the border. They came by train, by bus, by car, and many on foot, fleeing from Ukraine. This is a woman on a bus in the middle of the night. These were all taken in the midnight as the buses kept running all through the night. This is the train station in Krakow, which had essentially become a refugee center. It's a huge train station, and people were camped out all over it. And again, volunteers doing what they could. There were volunteer stations set up that were trying to match people with host families. People walking around, with yellow vests with the word volunteer on the back, and again, a huge sort of massive mobilization of help from the Polish people, uncompensated, all volunteers, just trying to do what they can to deal with this flood of refugees. And that again was the station in Krakow. And again. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I just essentially to sort of put that in a greater context. What I saw was an effort, a national effort to make this to help the Ukrainians in Krakow, where I flew into. There were billboards all over the city, huge billboards with "We stand with Ukraine" and the Ukrainian flag. It was there was a determined effort to not only to help these people, to make them feel welcome, and it was tangible, and it was something that really, I think, was a remarkable tribute to the Polish people. Not just the people, not just the army. The Polish army was doing what they could to keep things moving at the border. They were being very, very helpful to the refugees, the military, and it was a very a stark contrast to what I've experienced at the U.S.-Mexico border. So,
well, thanks, Allan. That's great.
Yeah.
I think what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to Tom to get his perspective on what he saw in Poland in that refugee effort. And
speak up for a sec.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Margaret Seiler. I just wanted to say, for people who came in late, thank you for being here. This webinar is People in Motion, and we thought of it as a follow-up to our last webinar, From the War in Ukraine to the US-Mexico Border, Who Gets to Move? Josh Rubin, Tom Cartwright, and I are part of the leadership team of Witness at the Border, all volunteer organization, as many of you know. And Allan Mestel is a professional photographer who has been with the Witness team in Florida, in Texas, and elsewhere. So thanks, Allan, for being here. And yeah, so Tom, we want to hear about your time in Poland. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks, Allan. Thanks, Josh. First, I'd like to underscore everything that Allan said. I was there in the same area. I was there 2 weeks. I overlapped maybe a few days with Allan, although we didn't have a chance to tie up because, as Josh mentioned, I was volunteering with World Central Kitchen, and we virtually worked at least 12 hours every day for 2 weeks. And that what we did was basically cook food, massive amounts of food, and then we would deliver the food or go give the food to people. And that might have been in shelters, and it might have been just right at the border. So it was kind of a all-around experience, and an amazing experience. It's just incredible what they were able to contribute and are contributing to the Polish people's response. In terms of what's different, what I saw different there than the border, because I have been at the border a lot as well and understand the process there. So as Allan said, when someone would come in and cross the border from Ukraine to Poland, they would either walk, or in some cases they would even ride on a bus and come through the checkpoint. It seemed like their processing, it seemed like took maybe 10 minutes. I don't know what it was, if it was even that. And they were then escorted either to a bus that was maybe at the checkpoint already going to a certain country. If they knew they wanted to go to Germany, there might be a bus there that was going to Germany right as they crossed the border. Or often if they walked that line that Allan showed, they would be helped to a bus, as Allan said, going 24/7, either in most cases to a shelter then, or in other cases to another country. And what was a stark contrast here is there were no handcuffs. No one was detained as far as I could see, and I don't think they were. And the police, the firemen, the military people were actually helping push those carts and helping carry things to the buses for people. It was a stark contrast to what we see at our border, where, as you know, with Title 42, which is in place still because of the court's injunction, and it probably will be for some time as things wind their way through court. Over the last 2.5 years, we've expelled around almost approaching 2 million people without the ability to ask for asylum in the United States. And again, contrast, mostly Black and brown people versus people that look like us. And that's not to say that anything is wrong with the response to Ukraine, either in Poland or at our southern border, where 20,000 people were granted humanitarian exceptions, Ukrainians were. That's wonderful. It's fantastic. It just should happen to Black and brown people too. And then once they were, if they had to go to a shelter to determine where they go, they'd go to these huge shelters that might have 5,000 or 7,000 people in them. And they were formed by the government. There were NGOs present there. No one was detained in those centers. They were free to do whatever they wanted, but they stayed because there were people there to help them with their travel arrangements. Again, contrasting that with the United States, where it's really left to the NGOs. Once someone, if they are released into the United States, they basically are basically just given to an NGO to be able to provide all those services. The government does virtually nothing after they're released to welcome them, to give them support, so again, a huge stark contrast. One of the things, there was one thing that was the same, and that was small grassroots NGOs. They really, and this is true all around the world, I'll talk about Greece in just a minute, but small NGOs provide an enormous benefit in these operations, both in Poland, as Allan said, and the United States. Humanitarian efforts, they fill the gaps. They do things that the government just can't do in terms of welcoming people. And when I say small NGOs, not UNHRC, not IOM, not the big, international organizations many people hear about, but the really small ones that are local. Caritas did a lot of work in the bus station or in the train station there. I know Allan probably ran across Caritas there and others. And now I'll talk a little bit about Greece, because there's some great similarities in Greece. Great, not great. There are some strong similarities in Greece and the United States border. So as you may know, a lot of refugees from Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa come through Turkey and make their way to Greece to try and find asylum. And what happens now is that they're often pushed back. They try and come by sea, a vast majority, because it's only 5 kilometers from the Greek islands, some of them to Turkey. And if they're not pushed back and they make it, they're put into camps that, as you see Allan's photos later on Matamoros, they're worse than Matamoros in many cases, especially on the islands. And the EU, the European government, funds Greece a substantial amount of money every year to maintain refugee camps in Greece and to process people so that they can get their, quote, papers to be able to possibly travel to Germany, Italy, Netherlands, someplace where they could apply for asylum. It's a long and arduous program. Many of the people I knew there were in that program for 2 or 3 years. And the way I think about it is that's not totally dissimilar to the old Remain in Mexico program or the Title 42 program. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's, we'll let Greece take care of all the people. And then we in the EU, who are doing amazing things, again, for people that look like us, Ukrainians, and they are doing amazing things, but for people of other parts of the world who don't look like us, who don't practice faith like us, who don't have a culture like us, they are not so welcoming. And so it literally is out of sight, out of mind. Keep them in Greece, grant very few people asylum, and so when we talk about who has the ability to move, it really gets down to people that we can relate to. We, the global we in the United States, or the global we in the EU. It's people we can relate to. They may not speak the same language, but they're the same color by and large. They practice similar faiths. Their culture is somewhat more similar than others. And that's just a fact. And again, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with what we have done for the Ukrainian population of Poland or Romania or any other countries. They've done amazing things. I mean, I know Allan would echo this. It's hard to explain the feeling you had in Poland when you were there, and the enormous number of people that just really had the compassion to do whatever they could to help these people. It's amazing, totally amazing. And so it just would be nice if the world could figure a way to move that to other parts of the world.
You know,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Just when you were in Greece, the majority of people living in the refugee camps were from Syria, or were they from different?
Many different countries: Syria, Iran, Iraq, Africa, Afghanistan, a lot. So anywhere in that general vicinity of the world would typically make the journey through Turkey.
Okay. Allan, did you?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Tom said about the small organizations. I mean, when people walk through that gate that I showed, it was almost like a shopping mall of resources that were available to people, and in terms of medical facilities, food from all different kinds of food, hygiene products. But I would say the majority, I mean, World Central Kitchen was definitely prominent, but the majority of these little sort of market stalls were, there was one young guy from the UK who had a small nonprofit, and he set up in honor of his mother, and he was there by himself with whatever volunteers cooking. The Polish Boy Scouts, were there.
Mm-hmm.
And just small villages had a sort of these small organizations that would come, and it was just people putting their lives on hold, heading to the border, to see what they could do to help. It was really incredible to see this vast. I mean, it was like a United Nations, people from literally all over the world, all there for the same purpose, for the same reason, just trying to fit into, try to be a cog in the wheel. There was no ego involved. It was just literally people saying, how can I help? Where can I help? And all hands on deck to try and do what they could.
Yeah, and Sarah had a question in the chat about the stuffed animals and areas where kids could just take them, whatever they wanted. And that was true. And as Allan said, kids just love these things. I mean, they'd hug them so tight, you couldn't believe, you couldn't get them out of their arms. And there was even a fellow dressed as Santa Claus. Okay, so we're in March now.
Right, I remember him.
You remember him? Yeah, up at the crossing. And he would come out with a bag of toys and stuffed animals and stuff dressed as Santa Claus, and the kids would just go crazy. He's just a guy. So it was an amazing scene.
Yeah, it sounds like the activities of these small groups, and we've seen this at the southern border. We've seen this. You've seen this in Europe. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that make us smile. Those are the things that warm our hearts. The big difference is the behavior of the governments, and we should take a look, I think, at the photos that Allan has of Matamoros, where a lot of us spent a lot of time watching what happens to people who are not wanted by one government and also not wanted by the other government.
And these pictures, Allan, were taken, what year was it?
This was literally just before COVID. I think it was February before
2020.
COVID.
2020.
So these, yeah.
Yeah.
So these images are of this camp that we're all so, very familiar with. It was or grew up organically on this sort of patch of scrubland sandwiched between the town of Matamoros and the Rio Grande. The living conditions were deplorable. People were lucky if they had a tent. Most people seem to live under, were under tarps. I think at its peak, it was what, 2,500, am I right?
Something
Yeah,
like
we
that.
never got a really accurate count, but I think that
it
number's
was
fair.
full
That number's fair.
of, despite the rhetoric from the government about these all being military-age males invading the border, it was almost exclusively families, tons of children, as you see here, doing their best to live as children. In fact, it was remarkable. What really impressed me was the incredible resilience of the kids. I mean, they were living in the most primitive conditions imaginable, and yet as long as they were loved, they were happy, and they played and found ways to amuse themselves. There's a child, I couldn't be more content asleep in its mother's arms, no matter where he is. Oh, and the same picture. Oh, no, it's slightly different in black and white. That's my mistake, sorry. Again, the kids, you can see that, the washing was hanging all over the camp. It was all dirt floors. There was people did their best to sort of try and keep the camp looking tidy. The migrants and the migrants were, they had a sense of pride in that camp. They did their best to make it home for everybody. You can see there the wood, that's wood that was scavenged at the banks of the river to cook with. And at mealtime, you could literally not even open your eyes as you walk through that camp. The stinging smoke from all of the clay, the fires that were in these clay ovens that people had built to cook was just, I don't know how they could stand it. I couldn't even open my eyes at meal times.
And just to remind people, these were people who were in the Remain in Mexico.
Yes, this was all MDB, right?
So they all had tried to seek asylum, and the United States said, no, you've got to go wait in Mexico. So they were living in basically a self-made refugee camp.
Really, really typical of the residents of the camp. Young families with small children. There was, people. There was efforts to provide schooling for the kids. The sidewalk school, and you guys probably know a lot more about that than I do. I know that was a big effort by the.
Well, the sidewalk school, and also Team Brownsville had a Sunday school.
What you see here, and what was remarkable is there was a sense of hope in that camp. It was not a place of despair. It really was. I mean, these people had the enormous resilience and still lived with joy, and with they were doing their best to make the best of a horrible situation. But they lived as a community, helping one another and living, with a sense of expectation that things would work out. It was incredible to see. What was unbelievable was the fact that was the way that they were treated by our government. The contrast there in terms of the way that the Poles welcomed these refugees, did everything they could to assist them. Not there was no sense of, oh well, they're here to steal our jobs, they're here to rape our women, they're here to that was utterly absent from what you felt from the Polish people. But yet, as we all know, from the rhetoric from the government at the time, and the rhetoric from primarily the right, is that somehow everybody at the border was an MS-13 gang member, just chomping at the bit to rape and pillage and steal and the fear that has been generated by design by the far right to justify their draconian immigration policies, which in themselves are just designed to cement their political power with their base.
Yeah, Alan, that's what makes the work that you do so important, because what you do is you show the faces of people that are not hard to love once you see them, once you see those faces.
Right.
We hear those words that you're talking about, and we hear the caricatures that are made by the people of the right. What we don't get to see, and what are really hidden from us, are the humanity. That's the humanity that's there. Like, for instance, Sarah, I think, just chimed in to point out that it wasn't just the United States government that persecuted those people. It was Mexico that didn't help them. Mexico that pushed them onto the banks of a river that threatened to come up and flood them. And Lee Goodman and I, down here in Brownsville, we went over toward McAllen today, and we crossed the bridge into Reynosa, and we saw a couple of the shelters there. But on the way there, before we got to the shelters, we saw the town square, the Zocalo, the main square of the town, and it was demolished. It was completely dug up, and it was surrounded by, orange dividing tape and stuff like that. So that was the place that the government of Reynosa went into and cleared out a settlement of Haitians that was in that town square. But it wasn't just enough for them to clear it out and to send those Haitians into one of the poorest neighborhoods, one of the poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods in Reynosa. They took advantage of the situation to also dig up that town square, demolish it, actually destroy the park, because they didn't want those people to return. That's how you keep people from being seen. You push them into neighborhoods that people are afraid to go into. You push them out of the parks in the middle. You push them out of the plaza in Matamoros so that they're on the bank and they're not noticeable. And when you get the chance, when you get the political moment, what did they do in Matamoros? They cleared those people out of the way. And now when we walk through Matamoros, what do we see? One or two families hiding in the crevices. We no longer see the people that are waiting at the border. They don't want us to see it. That's Mexico. That's the United States. It's a competition for who can hide this disgrace better. That's why it's so important that we see the photos and that we hear the testimony of people who've seen these things. And thank God somebody in the world actually, at least physically, knows how to take care of refugees, like they have it in Poland and in Poland and the Ukraine, cooperating that way. Governments that actually love their people and want to treat them well. But the difference is kind of obvious, and Tom brought it up before. Desperation doesn't know any color. It can come in as white a skin as we've got, right? But sympathy, simple humanity, knows plenty of color. And that's what's going on. That's the difference. The difference is, the ability to love across cultures, across races.
Can I just pick up on? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, just one comment was about the pictures. Is one of the reasons that I do this. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about it, despite the fact that makes my wife somewhat homicidal that I spend so much time doing stuff for unpaid, is that it provides a permanent record of a camp that no longer exists, that will serve as a rebuttal to future rhetoric about the types of people that were at the border. It will always be able to be available and be a permanent record of something that no longer exists, that existed at one point, and that was vilified. These people were vilified unjustly and characterized as pejorative terms, but that was unjustified and unearned. And these at least the pictures that I've captured will always remain as a rebuttal to that. But go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to actually pick up on that, as well as what Josh said, which is, Josh talked about how when you see this and when you talk to these people and you see how they live, you can't help but understand them. You can't help but have compassion for them. That's what those photos help do as well. to help people who haven't seen them. And I've always said that anybody, before they vote on anything having to do with migration around the world, needs to spend some time in one of these camps. I mean, really spend time, not a flyby, but like actually be with the people. I can't tell you how many times, even in Greece, and these would be people that, speak languages that I can't even come close, Arabic and Persian that I can't even come close to, but I can't tell you how many times when we were working there, we'd be invited for a meal. And these people have nothing. I mean, literally nothing. And you'd say, no, really, it's okay. Even it might be bread. I mean, they might have just made fresh bread, but they would ask you, and, this hope that you were talking about, Allan, I agree. I mean, even in Greece, as bad as it was, there was always this glimmer of hope. And that's where the sadness comes, because we all know how little hope there is.
Right.
and so, it's one thing to, see people that are hopeful and you think they might, something's going to happen. It's hard now because there is so little hope given the way the world is turning on migration.
I just want, I was just thinking, it's so great to see Allan's photographs, and we didn't, someone mentioned Haitians. Maybe it was, well, Josh was saying there was the Haitian camp that was dismantled. And some of you probably know that Allan went to Del Rio, Texas, when the Haitians were basically kept under a bridge, and took some amazing photographs, which we did not tee up for you tonight, but I'm putting his website in the chat. It's Allan Mestel with 2 L's.com. And there's a link to his Del Rio pictures. But again, it just shows everybody remembers that the children were not greeted with stuffed animals in Del Rio. They were greeted with Border Patrol people on horseback with whips. So That's the whole thing we're talking about, is everyone is trying to move for very real reasons, and some are greeted with kindness and some aren't.
Yeah, and speaking of documenting, today Lee Goodman and I were in Reynosa, and we saw a couple of the shelters that have gone up there. Valiant efforts to build shelters there, but the second shelter that they're trying to open has inadequate shade. It's a very rough place, hard to be in. The children kind of cluster under the little bit of shade there is. And to get there, you have to go through a neighborhood that apparently is so dangerous that some of the bigger NGOs anyway won't even let their people go there. And we know the situation that those people are in, because we know that if they cross the border, if they tried to cross the border, they would get loaded onto the planes that Tom documents, those flights that Tom documents from the United States back to Haiti, back to a hopeless situation, back to a country in chaos and poverty. So there they are, stuck between those two things. We saw the shelters. We saw the people that are too afraid to cross the border because they'll be put onto planes. We saw, we see these things. We see the connections between these things. So there are the photos, but there's also the work that, puts together the picture. So we were looking at people who couldn't move, people lined up, gathered outside these shelters hoping for a spot inside, where they let as many people as they can in at night, but they can't let that many because they don't want them to be attacked on the streets. And
these are people you saw today because they had been rejected from the US by Title 42. So they were trying to...
I think in fact, these are people for the most part who know what their fate would be with Title 42. They wouldn't be sent back into Mexico.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be put on planes and flown back to Haiti. So they're not going to take the chance. They were waiting, right on the start line for Title 42 to be lifted so that they could move toward the border. There were lots of people ready, we were told, ready to move to that bridge, which of course is going to create a spectacle that we're going to have to explain to people. But then Title 42 didn't happen. But what did happen is the heat went up above 90 today, with the heat index going toward 100 in the full sun. And people, again, waiting outside the gate. The streets on the way in this neighborhood, which are among the most dilapidated streets I've seen in this hemisphere. People waiting for their chance, waiting for something to change.
I just wanted to bring up, there are a couple questions in the chat. Rama had asked if anyone had witnessed crime inside the encampment, the Matamoros encampment, and Tom answered her what I think we would all say who were down there, that there wasn't crime inside the camp, except that was being threatened by the cartels who were able to get into the camp at night. And so that was, maybe you all want to talk about that. But there was also another question. Yeah, I'll read it. It says, did you see in Poland any examples of reports we have heard about nationalists confronting and even attacking Africans and other people of color coming from Ukraine?
I didn't see any of that. I don't know. You know, it could have happened. It could be happening, but it's not something that I experienced. I did see African people come over. I didn't see them abused in any way, but I'm that's a sample of, you know, a tiny part of what happened.
Yeah, what I saw, I didn't see any of that at all. You know, most of the people I saw were white. I did see a number of people of color, but very small numbers. So, you know, and I just think that's probably a function of the fact that most of the people in Ukraine is pretty homogenous part of the world. But yeah, no, I didn't see any of that.
The news, I just want to add to that the news reports, I of course didn't see it because I wasn't anywhere near it. The news reports that I saw involved getting on the trains in Kiev, that there was some discrimination in terms of that dark Africans were pushed to the back of the line.
Right, that's what I have read too. And I just want to put an exclamation point on the flights and people of color. So just so everybody's clear, since the inauguration, this administration has sent 261 plane loads of people back to Haiti, a country that is a country that the State Department has warned no American should go to. That represents about 26,000 people. That is 1 in every 450 people in Haiti the US government has put on a plane and sent back to a country that is now basically run by gangs.
Yeah, it's amazing, Tom. It's amazing, and it's something that I learned today that underscored something, maybe something I should have known. A lot of the Haitians speak bits of English, they speak bits of Spanish. Of course, they speak French and they speak Creole. Why do they know so many languages? Well, because they've been on the road for years, because they've been traveling for years. These are people who are spending 40 years in the desert here. These are people who've been wandering away from a land that they can no longer live in, trying to find a place. And here they wait now at our threshold.
The majority of the Haitians I spoke to in Del Rio, who did not come from Haiti, directly from Haiti, they had built lives for themselves in places like Venezuela and Chile, and their status had been revoked due to COVID, and they just decided to use that as an excuse to invalidate their. So they were once again on the move through no fault of their own, and some of them had spent years in some of these South American countries, had lives there, and really had, would have happily just remained where they were, except for the fact that they were no longer welcome, and they were forced to move on.
Yeah, there's another way to look at what people who come to our border are doing. We often view them as supplicants who come because they have nothing else. what they really are, in another way of looking at it, is what they really are is heroes who are struggling to make lives for their families and themselves. They're doing what they have to do to get here, and when they get to our border, they may have to struggle. They may have to suffer through all kinds of indignities, but it's heroic what they're doing. They do this in order to live. They do this in order to give their children life. And I don't know, it just occurred to me today when I was seeing these people so stoically hanging in there in this extraordinary scene of rubble and hopelessness. They're hanging in there with their hope, like you talked about, Allan. They've got that hope, and God, I hope they make it.
Yeah. Interestingly, that sense of hope that was so tangible in Matamoros was completely absent, and in Poland. These people were shell shocked, literally, having had their lives. They were living lives much like you. We're all living until the bombs started falling. They had no desire to move to Poland, to move to Germany, to go to. This was not something that was part of their game plan. They were simply on the run to try and save their lives. I mean, it was just pure misery. I don't know if that was similar to what you experienced, Tom.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Shell shocked is a good word, and in some cases, literally shell shocked.
Yeah.
But in all cases, and they're leaving behind their husband, brother, sister, or rather father, and not knowing if they'll ever see them again.
Yeah.
Because they're on the front lines. And so, if you think about the trauma and the survivor trauma that they'll have to endure, even if they go back, if they've lost someone in that war, the survivor trauma of I left, I have my life, but my husband, father, brother, son died, and now I'm going back. It doesn't, that survivor trauma will never go away.
Right. You never go back to the same place after that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about your having been to Greece, Tom, and I know you've been there more than once to work with refugees from all over the world, like you said, Afghanistan and various other places. And it just makes me think sometimes, a lot of people who aren't as involved in this work and don't know enough about what's happening, I think they think this is a temporary problem that, those people coming to the border, it's going to be solved at some point and they won't be coming. But as we know, this is a global problem. I mean, it's not a global problem. It's a global, people need to move. And because of climate change or, violence or persecution in their countries, I don't know. I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about.
Yep. One thing
that.
Yeah, and one worry that I have, one of the things I saw in Greece over probably a period of 3 years was when the crisis started, by and large around 15, the Greek people were quite like the Polish people. They were welcoming. We want you in our community. We will help you out. As time went on, it became less welcoming and more, isn't this about ready to be over? Why do we have all these people coming into our towns? Why do we have to spend money for this? Now, the EU was paying the Greek government, but, much like many governments, the money doesn't really get down to where the migrants are. But, they all of a sudden turned more. And so that's when you started to see turnbacks, and you started to see right-wing groups in Greece actually doing turnbacks. So I do have a worry that, as you mentioned, Margaret, this long-term nature of what we see is difficult. It's more difficult the second year and even more difficult the third year. So that I do worry about this, whether or not that will happen in the EU.
and all over the world.
Exactly.
As people remain in motion, and people who aren't in motion now are in motion in the future. I mean, we're facing all kinds of crises that are going to move us all.
Yeah, and these pushbacks are not just happening in Greece; they're happening, all around Europe. They're happening in Britain, as Sarah pointed out in the chat. They're happening in Spain. They're happening all along the Mediterranean, in turning back boats. They're happening between Cuba and the United States, turning back boats, turning back 5,000 Haitians so far this year, compared to like 1,500 last year. So, that it is becoming acceptable in the world community, this behavior, which is very scary. And it's similar to what's happening with Title 42. There's court cases, but there's also legislation to keep Title 42 in place that will probably be brought in a couple of weeks that would tie it to the COVID bill. And that's just one step. But it's a huge step to saying we're going to legislate away asylum.
Right, it's de facto gone. It's going to be, de jure is gone pretty soon. And no matter what you call it, Title 42 is just a name and an excuse. What it comes down to is we're going to pass laws to say that our borders are our gates. We are a gated community. And that's the way we're going to stay, because we're going to hold on to what's left as the world deteriorates around us. That's what makes people as desperate as this. People seeing their lives falling apart. Nothing's going to stop that. And certainly hating people and treating them badly isn't going to stop.
And there's a question in the chat about situation of refugees wanting to go to countries like Argentina or Brazil, where it's more peaceful and normal. I think it depends on which refugees. Those countries are not very welcoming of Haitians or of people of other nationalities. So they may be more peaceful in the sense that they're safer for most people. I think many of the people that have Haitians, at least that have come up, a lot of them were in Brazil and found it untenable to stay there.
And of course, there are segments of the population in Brazil that find themselves at our southern border as well. People have all kinds of reasons for moving. I don't know that we have to insist that they be desperate. It just seems that they often are desperate, which gives us a sense of urgency. But what's wrong with letting people move for whatever reason, for whatever personal reasons that they may have? Why that's not in the discussion, I don't really understand. We would be allowed to move to any of these places if we wanted to move there. And we carry no special benefits for the places that we go.
No.
We are simply people moving.
Yeah.
Just the darker someone's skin, the less welcome they seem to be anywhere. And it's almost like a ladder of racism.
Yeah. Vielka, who we know is in the question and answer. She said she's now living in Iowa, where there are a number of undocumented people. And her question is, does anyone have updated country breakdown statistics? I guess maybe she's talking about along the border, like Brownsville, Matamoros area. People, who are being affected by Title 42. I mean, yeah, we certainly know, well, maybe you guys, maybe Tom or Josh want to answer that.
Well, you go ahead, Tom. I mean, at different places, there are different, I guess, different groups tend to go to different places. It just seems to happen sometimes. But there are numbers out there about the nationalities of those encountered under Title 42, right, Tom?
Yeah. So just as an example, and these aren't people expelled; these are people that are, that come across, of which a certain percentage are expelled. But this ties into a question also that Sue has in the chat. So last month in April, the last reported month, there were about 81,000 Mexicans that were encountered at the border. In other words, that came across the border. That was the largest group. Interestingly, the next largest group, which has escalated significantly, were Cubans, 34,000. And then it was Guatemala at 19,000, Honduras at 15,000. So it's really tilted significantly, and Colombia at almost 13,000. The reason some people are getting released into the United States, and they're released pending an asylum claim. So it doesn't mean they're free, and it doesn't mean they're going to be able to stay. It just means they're going to be able to apply for asylum. There's two reasons. One is depending upon what country you are. So let's talk about discrimination. Cuba will not accept people back, period, because we don't have diplomatic relations. Venezuelans won't accept people back. We don't have diplomatic relations. Nicaragua will accept about 300 people back a month. And so there is nothing else that, to be honest, that they can do about certain people or nationalities. However, if you look at, and so the expulsion rate is like 2-3% for some of those populations. In other words, 98% of the people going to Title VIII can proceed. Conversely, if you were to look at Central Americans, 45% are expelled. So let's talk about discrimination even within Title 42. It's not a fair process even within it. Right. And then there are humanitarian paroles and those kinds of things that, again, going back to the small NGOs, these are just heroes that are trying to give people a chance who are vulnerable and so forth to get into the United States. And they're putting together cases to try and get them across the border. But the vast majority, frankly, are folks that are from countries that are lucky enough their countries won't accept them back.
So I think we're just about coming to the end. Josh, do you want me to give my little plug? And then,
yes. Give me 30 seconds, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
So yesterday in the morning, we went to the airport to watch a flight where we were chased away from the airport. The flight was of people being expelled to Honduras. We went over to Raymondville, where before we got too close to an ORR facility there, the guards ran out to make sure that we didn't get any closer. They left their little booths and came out and kept us at a distance. Then we went over to Matamoros in the evening, and on the way back on the bridge, we were faced with lots and lots of men being deported. We know they were being deported because I asked them. We know they were being deported because they didn't have shoelaces. And we passed a section where we saw a bus where more men were being unloaded, and the chains had just been taken off of their legs and were waiting on the ground. An ICE officer angrily waved us away from there. They don't want us to see, and that's why we have to keep looking. That's what I wanted to say. Take it away, Margaret.
Thank you, Josh. So I wanted to thank Tom and Allan, and I especially want people to know that you should check out Allan's website, allanmestel.com, for more photographs. And, I think if you wanted to speak about this issue, refugees and asylum seekers, his pictures are available, but you want to give him credit for them, but he's been very generous to our group. And also to Welcome with Dignity, the campaign that we're a part of. They've used some of his pictures too. So of course, Witness at the Border. You should follow us on Facebook, Witness at the Border. Follow us on Twitter @WitnessBorder. And I am putting in the chat, I will read it aloud. Please go to Patreon to become a patron of Witness Radio, the project hosted and directed by Sarah Towell. And we're now in the second year of Witness Radio. I think Sarah will be releasing, I believe it's the 14th episode. Probably next week, the new episode will come out. So patrons, of course, are just helping with the finances of keeping the project going. Whatever you can give on a monthly basis is super helpful, and you get some little perks to go with that. So we really encourage everyone who supports our work to become a patron of the project. So thanks everyone for coming and for your questions. And we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much.